Good afternoon, everybody. As you know, we are here to take part in the Professor K.K. Subramanian Memorial Lecture. Professor Subramanian, as you all know, was a well-wisher, not a well-wisher, but a very active part of COSFORD. And as he was also a very distinguished academic, researcher, and teacher, and he left a number of his students in very key positions all over India and abroad, who also would like to remember him fondly. And we are very happy that we have got one such person, Professor Lekha Chakraborty, as our speaker. She is a product of CDS, and she is very distinguished academic in the field of public finance. She works in the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. She has contributed much to the macroeconomics and the policy arena in this country, and is a member of number of committees at the state and the central level. So without much further ado, I would invite Professor Lekha to deliver the KKS Memorial Lecture. And I especially welcome Mrs. Subramanian, who is also part of this audience.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, audible.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words. It's my privilege and it's my honor to deliver Professor K.K. Subramanian Memorial Lecture. He was our pillar of strength when we were students of CDS. And two things I remember about Sir is, one, how to support, one's own students unconditionally. Without any expectations, how one should support one student. And second, what I learned from Sir is, how to make a student prepare to argue out, what are the numbers and what are the analysis with internal consistency, and also to take criticisms. That kind of toughness in treatment by the teacher, and also at the same time, the hand-holding that he's there for us, that unconditional support, that molded us to do better, in the later part of life when, we started our journey in think tanks or in academic institutions. And, of course, Patmanti is very precious for me. And of course, Deepthi and Kamalesh also, Baba also, I'm thinking about them in this moment. And especially a word about Kamalesh. When I was in IMF doing the fiscal policy to tackle the gender inequality, that global survey, the city was new to me, but he came down to meet me with, Georgetown special cupcakes and make me comfortable in the new city. And I remember him, and he was also in engineering college in 1995. He was the senior to my younger brother, and when my younger brother was beginning his journey in engineering field, the way he supported him as his senior, that also I do remember. And this what Sir has taught us, the only way we can repay back is how we can give our students the comfort, the unconditional support which Sir has given us. Having said that, Dr. Shaijan and, Supagaran Sir, as we have spoken, my lecture today, I will be focusing on the macro policy responses to the pandemic. And when I talk about the macroeconomic policy responses to pandemic, I would like to emphasize on the two important tools of macroeconomic policy. That is what RBI and the center governments all over the world has done to tackle the crisis, and how the North Bloc and the Ministry of Finance, all over the world has done to tackle the crisis. And you must have seen the recent fiscal monitor of IMF and also the World Economic Outlook. And you can take a look into those numbers. Things are not good. These are extraordinary times. So we tried our level best, in packaging whatever it takes to, to tackle the pandemic. But of course, there are variations in the country performances, and the country performance depends on, the vaccination rates, of course, the epidemiology of the virus, and also the ability of the macroeconomic policy tools to control the crisis. So when I say the ability of the macroeconomic policy tools to control the crisis, I would love to say that it cannot be a counter-cyclical policy, because the overall judgment about an emerging economy like India is that the moment fiscal policy and monetary policy act as the tools of, counter-cyclicality policy tools, then we will be able to correct the growth process, the growth recovery will go back to the pre-pandemic levels. But that could be a costly mistake at this moment. We cannot say that it's all cyclicality that led to the growth downturn, because, in the context of advanced economies, these may be a temporary aberration. But in the context of emerging economy, this drop in the GDP, that could be a permanent scar. And once we correct the cyclicality, it may not go back to the pre-pandemic or the pre-recession levels. Because we know that the growth downturn that is not pandemic induced, we were facing with a growth downturn even prior to the pandemic. Even the recession started even prior to that. So to correct that, if you look at closely, the pandemic packages all over the world. I have written about this. My co-author was Emmanuel Thomas. I think he joined for our, meeting today. We have written about it, how, monetary policy and fiscal policy tackled, as, what you call in two components. One is the firefighting component, which of course dealt with the cyclicality, and other is, how we can convert the crisis, into opportunities, and how the long-term fiscal and monetary policy measures are, designed to tackle the crisis. And the moment when I talk about the, economic firefighting packages, the important component is how we visualized our fiscal space. Because if you look at the United Nations Secretary Generals, when the pandemic broke out, the command, I must say, his command was that the government should be very serious about the fiscal space to tackle about this pandemic, and his threshold number was 10% of GDP. That's, the member nations should design the policies to 10% of GDP. But of course, the size and the magnitude of COVID pandemic package entirely depends on the fiscal space available to the country. So the next question was how you design your fiscal space. What are the major decisions taken by the countries to, regarding the fiscal space? Their debt deficit dynamics was very important. And you must be remembering what Oliver Blanchard, the famous economist, have spoken in the American Economic Association conference. What he mentioned was that high debt and high deficit in the extraordinary times is welcome. Because, if you can articulate that your high deficit or high debt you are using for reducing the output gap, and if you're using it to enhance the public infrastructure and the human capital formation, then go ahead with it. Then what is a villain in this process? The villain is the rules-based fiscal economics, or even you look at the monetary policy side, that is also equally rules-based. So when monetary and fiscal macro policy space is rules-based, then the kind of degrees of freedom in which you can operate and you can tackle the pandemic, that will be, will be constrained. So that you have to take seriously. So how you can enhance the fiscal space given your fiscal rules, because fiscal austerity measure that is very detrimental in the context of a pandemic, because we cannot afford to have expenditure compression in the moment of pandemic. At the same time, revenue uncertainty is there. When the taxes are not buoyant, and when you have a fiscal consolidation path in front to keep your fiscal deficit GDP ratio at 3%, then the only way out is the expenditure compression. At the same time, the revenue expenditure, you need to have this moment to tackle the health crisis. Of course, it's a primarily a health crisis. If you don't tackle that, it is going to be bounce into a prolonged macroeconomic crisis. So the first thing is, what we have to do is we have to accept the fact that deficit is good in the times of pandemic and high fiscal deficit is okay in the time of pandemic. And if you look at the recent numbers of the center government, it is around 9.5% of GDP. Of course, there's a question of fiscal transparency over there, a kind of borrowing that has happened outside the purview or through public sector enterprises is also the part of that. But you should not be worried about the deficit. So that story I have to give, that's a punchline I have to give when we talk about the fiscal responses to pandemic. Now coming to the monetary policy response, and that the monetary policy, there are limitations to tackle a recession or a pandemic, because the only policy tool available to the monetary policy authority is the repo rate or the policy rate. So maneuvering the policy rates, if it is not one-to-one in tackling the economic growth, then you won't get the growth story correct. So when there is a partial response by the monetary policy authorities to the growth recovery, fiscal redominance is quite crucial over there. And on the top of that, countries have to respond to how, Fed Reserve, they are going to change their monetary policy stance, because that global arena is very important, because beggar thy neighbor, that kind of policy, if it is maneuvered by the Fed Reserve, then that's going to be detrimental in the growth recovery process in the emerging economies. In the sense, US Fed Chair Jay Powell has specified in the recent Jackson Hole Economic Symposium, because students know that this is the economic symposium. We look forward to understand the articulation of how the monetary policy stance of US Fed is going to respond. So in the economic symposium, in the Jackson Hole meeting of 2021, and also in the Federal Open Market Committee, it is like our monetary policy committee in India, in the FOMC meetings, there was a clue that there was a likelihood of tightening the US monetary policy stance. They are going ahead with reducing their balance sheet. And what is the repercussion of that? There could be a possible rise in the policy rate in early 2022 by the US government. So the repercussions will be on the emerging economies. And that there are fragile economies like Brazil, Turkey, India. So how they are going to tackle this process? And if we don't increase the interest rate, then what will happen? The capital flight will happen, because a part of our capital, our foreign capital, is portfolio. That's hot money, and hot money always responds to the high interest rate. So unless we increase our interest rate, RBI doesn't increase interest rates, then there can be a capital flight. And of course, if you look at the imported inflation, the global variables like energy prices, and of course the food prices are shooting up. If you look at the inflationary process as well, we are not in a comfort zone. Our inflation is beyond the comfort zone. How I define the comfort zone? That, let me give you a perspective. We know that in 2016, Government of India and RBI entered into an agreement, and that is called the New Monetary Policy Framework. And as per the New Monetary Policy Framework, price stability was the only concern, is the only concern of RBI. So inflation is their mandate, and this inflation is again based on a rules-based monetary policy. Rules in the sense, the Tyler rule is not written in that monetary policy agreement, but that inflation targeting, which is that pegging the interest rates, the policy rates, based on the inflation anchor, inflationary expectations, and the output gap. So that is quite crucial. And here the inflation anchor we have designed for India is 4%. And of course, we have the comfort zone of plus or minus 2. So literally, if it is above 6%, then we are technically beyond the comfort zone. But the articulation by RBI is that these, rates above this comfort zone is just a transitory phenomenon. We don't have to worry about it because it happened due to, supply chain disruptions and also due to the temporary things that is happening at the energy prices. So things will be all right because it's not a demand side inflation, because we know that, there are supply side economics functioning as a part of, economic growth process or economic pandemic packages, but the demand side is not yet stimulated and the demand side policies are not yet, taken place. When I say about the demand side policy space, the major thing what we anticipated was like a huge fiscal transfers to the hands of people, cash transfers to the hands of people. It's not like a helicopter money, but a targeted cash transfers into the hands of people. But that has not happened in our country. The articulation by North Bloc is that, there is no guarantee that this is going to trigger, demand. Instead, if the propensity to save by the people is higher than, the propensity to spend, then, huge cash transfers also cannot trigger, demand recovery. So that was the argument. Then, the next option is the employment policy. When we are in a pandemic period, how the government can act as an employer of last resort by guaranteeing jobs, because this is participation income, that you participate in the economy and earn an income. But if you look at the allocations, you have seen that the job guarantee allocations were coming down because, if you are unable to find jobs, then you articulate that as, no money is transferred in the hands of people. So maybe a kind of policy maneuvering over there is required, that even if you are unable to guarantee jobs for a certain number of period, that cash can be transferred in the hands of people as a cushion, instead of designing a separate cash transfer programs. So in addition to the government acting as an employer of last resort, and in addition to the targeted cash transfers, there are four important components which you need to give emphasis. And one is, your social protection measures. In India, we don't have, significant social protection measures. That's a crucial point. If you unpack the economic pandemic packages all over the world, the social protection measures, that is not quite, significant in the pandemic packages. And the second point is the food security. And we have seen in the recent, the global hunger, that index have come out, and India is not doing well. And food security is an important issue. And nutrition, giving importance to the nutrition aspects, these are important issues. And we need to give a huge space, even at the subnational levels, we need to give a huge space to the food security concerns in the time of pandemic. And the third is, of course, the education. We are facing the digital divide right now, and whatever we have attained in terms of the enrollment, that is not the story right now. If you adjust for the digital divide, then the enrollment rate, that's plummeting like anything. So we need to tackle that digital divide process. And the fourth, that's quite important component, is health. Investment in health is quite crucial, and that's the single most significant, investment that has to happen right now. But we have been, maybe erring on the side of caution, that we don't have fiscal space, and we are keeping the health budget to GDP, around 1% of our GDP, not even 1%. So whatever that preparedness is required to vaccinate, because if you look at the fiscal monitor of IMF and the World Economic Outlook that was published in this month, October, early, October, you can see that, the countries in which you have that public health infrastructure so crucial, and the countries which have succeeded in, doing the vaccination process, they are able to control the pandemic much better than, the other parts of the world. So there is a clue over there that it is primarily a health crisis, and we need to spend a huge amount on, health sector, infrastructure, personnel, and vaccination. That is much more crucial than investing in any other sectors. But, if you look at the pandemic packages in the life versus livelihood, that was not the way, it was given importance. And of course, it was not a simultaneous process. It was a sequential process in the way we have addressed the livelihood concerns. And that is yet another, the policy, that constraint. What all what has happened on the fiscal side. Now coming back to the monetary policy side, I mentioned about the global challenges. One is the capital flight that can happen because of the US Fed Reserve raising the interest rates, and second is the imported inflation and the inflationary process that's happening globally. But at the same time, the dilemma of RBI is that we cannot increase the rate of interest because that will affect the growth process. So in this dilemma, they have given importance to the growth concerns and kept the repo rate status quo at 4%. But the story doesn't stop there. The other policy instruments available to RBI is reverse repo rate. And of course, you need to look into the monetary policy corridor. They have nudged the commercial banks to go ahead with the lending process in the economy by maneuvering this policy corridor and adjusting that space between the reverse repo rate and overnight, that marginal lending facility rate. But right now, there is a news, or there is a tendency all over the world by the central banks to go for normalization procedure. In the sense, whatever excess liquidity they have announced to tackle the pandemic crisis, slowly they are absorbing that excess liquidity. And there are concerns about excess liquidity in the sense, the call money market, the rates are below the repo rate, and we also have repercussions on the GSEC, the gilt-edged securities market. But if we look at the numbers, in spite of RBI nudging, the commercial banks to go ahead with the lending process, there is a tendency for the commercial banks to park back the amount into the RBI. So that's a reverse repo rate, and that reverse repo rate was kept at 3.35%. Even then, that's happening. And recently, all what I can see is that there is no normalization procedure by the RBI. All what they have done is they have gone into a tightening process of just the variable repo rate. That's the cutoff field. If you look at, that's now 3.99. Otherwise, they have not announced in the recent meeting, in the early October meeting, about a hike in the what you call the reverse repo rate as well. Now, the story doesn't stop even there. It is not about the reverse repo rate or the repo rate that, the entire story of a monetary policy stance. Of course, we have done the mistake in the sense, India has gone ahead with inflation targeting framework since 2016. And as per that, we are, by mandate only to look into the price stability. But when the pandemic hit our country, if you look at the policy announcements, we have gone prior to the new monetary policy framework. We have had many announcements related to liquidity infusion and even the regulations, the way it used to happen prior to the new monetary policy framework. Because inflation targeting itself, some of the scholars in front of me, young scholars, can look into this question, whether that itself must have led to, low growth rate in the country, because that one-to-one process of repo rate and the GDP, that does not happen like that. So the reverse rate that failed to trigger the economy, or why the story is partial, that we need to take a look. That's one thing. And second, how countries responded to a crisis. In 2007, we had global financial crisis. Now there's a pandemic crisis. In 2007, if you look at, of course, no crisis or no, recession is, followed by a quick rebound. We are not going to get a quick V-shaped or a U-shaped recovery. Rather, it will be K-shaped because of the inequalities, widening inequalities in our country and in, other emerging economies. That is very crucial. The second point is like the credit story. What we have emphasized in the pandemic package is the credit story, that credit deployment is going to give a growth boost. And we have not touched the fiat money because the fiscal space is quite limited. So articulation by many economists, including Professor Kaushik Basu, Professor Abhijit Banerjee, and even industrialists like Kotik Mahindra, what they're arguing is like, can we increase the fiscal space using the fiat money? But it was a huge debate. And of course, my director, Professor Lekha Chakraborty, has spoken to the Press Trust of India regarding this, that there is a danger in going for fiat money at this moment because it can can lead to fiscal profligacy. But at the same time, he mentioned that two macroeconomic variables are quite crucial over here. One is the real rate of interest, and the other is the real growth of economy. And if your real rate of interest is greater than the real growth of economy, then of course you have to go back to your fiat money or seigniorage financing of your deficits. But till then, it's a kind of free lunch, but you are comfortable in the sense that you grow out of debt. You may have high debt, but how the debt is sustainable because you grow out of it. Your G is greater than R. So that's a point. But if the R is greater than G, then you have to think about the innovative sources of financing the deficit to get the fiscal space to tackle the pandemic, because monetary policy space is limited. Repo rate or the reverse repo rate or the liquidity infusion or the credit offtake, there are limitations in triggering the economy through that process. So the fiscal dominance is quite relevant. Fiscal dominance means we have to get our fiscal space correct in the time of revenue uncertainties. So center government and the state governments, they have gone ahead with innovating the fiscal space. For instance, center government has given emphasis to the privatization proceeds. And of course, we know that only one thing that has happened, over the last 1 year is the aviation sector, that little bit of privatization has happened. But otherwise, the valuation process, the pricing process, the labor market repercussions, all these are quite important the moment we go ahead with privatization. And it is important to look into this process, not just from the fiscal proceeds perspective. Second point is, even from the fiscal proceeds perspective, if you look into the recent Union Budget 2021, you can see that the privatization proceeds is just, even if your aspiration is correct, that is just around 6% of the entire revenue receipts, if you look at the revenue and the capital receipts. So if the fiscal marksmanship is perfect, if you're going to get, what you aspire as the fiscal proceeds, the fiscal space from the privatization, even if that marksmanship is perfect, then it is only about, you're talking the story about 5% of the entire revenue receipts budget. So that is a way center government is emphasizing to increase the fiscal space, because other is revenue uncertainties. Revenues are getting buoyant right now, but these high frequency fiscal data we cannot depend on. Of course, there is a clarion call to look into the real-time analysis of fiscal marksmanship. Then only we will be able to avoid the bunching of the revenue and the expenditure towards the March, towards the end of the fiscal cycle, so that real-time collecting of the fiscal marksmanship analysis is quite relevant, and that is an important tool of PF, public financial management. But that is not it happened. We have to wait and see how it is going to be rolled out in our country. Now, coming back to the monetary policy side, I mentioned that normalization procedure is not at home. We are grappling with the policy dilemma that unless we increase the rate, there could be the capital could be flighty, the hot money could be flighty, and the inflation process, that's a concern. But we kept it at what you call the new accommodative stance, not even neutral stance, accommodative stance, and 4% over the various MPC meetings to get this goal correct. That is our growth recovery. But the story now goes beyond the MPC meetings. Monetary Policy Committee, their mandate is looking into the repo rates. Even the reverse repo rates, they are not able to maneuver correctly. So what is the constraint of that operational independence of the Monetary Policy Committee? That is crucial to look. And India has gone ahead from, the monetary policy decisions taken by RBI governor to a committee. Now the voting process is on. It is through an operational independence. But of course, we don't have the goal independence, but we have the operational independence. At the same time, it is not the story of center bank independence, because in this macro policy setting, macroeconomic framework, if you look at, fiscal policy has always been the first mover, and the monetary policy follows. So that is always there. But the moment I argue for the fiat money or for the seigniorage financing, then that fiscal redominance is given importance. And why government of India is not going for that. It's not from the perspective of, the technical R and G macro variables, but from the historicist perspective, because over the years we have controlled the fiat money, the seigniorage financing of deficit, and we have gone ahead with the bond financing of deficit. So once again, if you open that fiat money, that space, then what's going to be the fiscal profligacy? What is going to be the repercussions? But I have written about it that a finite fiscal space through monetization of deficit, not assets, of course, monetization of deficit is crucial in the sense the alternative is we don't have money, we have to go for austerity measures. So that expenditure compression in the time of pandemic can be quite detrimental for growth process and for the growth recovery. So what's an alternative? Then, that's why I was arguing for a finite monetization. But, we have to see the big picture. What Professor Lekha Chakraborty was arguing is that the moment we open up this instrument, when it comes to the question of fiscal marksmanship, if you're not getting the tax projections all right, and what we projected and what we realized is not matching, if there is an issue of fiscal marksmanship, would it open a floodgate for an adjustment through the fiat money? The way it has happened in the late 80s. So that is a concern. So otherwise, if it can be tied to an employer of last resort policy or to a targeted cash transfers for a finite time, a finite MFFP, money financing a fiscal program, then, that is, I think that, that can be thought of. But, North Bloc has not yet, decided that from a point of strength because of the fiscal profligacy which it could trigger. So that's the concern. All what has happened is they have owned the statement that deficit is good in the time of pandemic if you can articulate that by enhancing public investment. Because investors' confidence will not get affected if you have high debt in the time of pandemic. The moment you can articulate that from the point of strength of enhancing the public investment. Because if you look at any empirical models, it is the public investment that's a crucial determinant for private corporate investment, no other variables. So here, the clarion call is to keep your macroeconomic fundamentals all right, including the fiscal deficit. But if you keep on doing that macroeconomic fundamentals, including the fiscal deficit, to the 3% of GDP, then it is going to be a little tricky because you won't get the growth all right, because monetary policy is partial in doing that. So it's a policy dilemma. That's what is happening, because on one side you need to tackle the plausible capital outflows in case Fed Reserve increases their Fed policy rate. So how to tackle that? We have already done capital controls and we found that it is not effective. And we have already intervened in the forex market to, stabilize the currency, but that is also not a permanent solution. When those things are not permanent, the second thing or the biggest option is work out your macroeconomic fundamentals, whether it is current account deficit, whether it is inflation, whether it is fiscal deficit. That's why the importance of the macroeconomic fundamentals, that is quite crucial for the foreign capital. So you can understand the policy dilemma that's happening, right? On the one side, we are unable to increase the rate of the policy rates because we fear a repercussion on the growth recovery. On the other hand, the fiscal dominance, you cannot control your fiscal deficit because that is also will affect your growth recovery process. So in this, theoretically speaking, we have two options. One is unpleasant fiscal arithmetic option, and the other is unpleasant monetary policy option, arithmetic option. So unpleasant monetary arithmetic is you give importance to the fiscal policy makers, the first mover advantage, and the monetary policy follows. Here there is no question of central bank independence, and here the question, unless your R is greater than G, you are comfortable. But if your R is greater than G, the monetary Arithmetic is going to be unpleasant because you have to eventually monetize your deficit. And on the other hand, unpleasant fiscal arithmetic is you're giving full independence to the central bank. And the central bank will be the first mover using the repo rate. But there, you can understand that even the policy rates, that cannot control inflation, because inflation is not strictly a monetary phenomenon in our country. What are the other kinds of non-monetary factors from the supply side? All these things are quite relevant. But the way RBI defended that is like through expectations channel. You know that inflationary expectations is an unobserved variable, but through the expectations survey, they created this variable, and through that expectations channel, even the supply side components can be controlled in the process. So these are the ways in which, this is getting controlled. And these, if the students are interested in reading about this, the fiscal theories of price determination, that's the recent work, the recent school of thought, because the moment we talk about price determination, it's an irony. How can it be fiscal? But there is a fiscal root or the fiscal theory to the price determination process. Of course, they also believe in, it's a Chicago school of thought, they believe in, pegging the interest rates to tackle the inflationary expectations and the output gap. So you can take a look into it. And I want to open the floor also. So my last point is the output gap. These are times of macroeconomic uncertainties. And how you measure this macroeconomic uncertainty. RBI and Note Block, we have depended on an unobserved variable, that is output gap, to deal with this process. And what exactly is this tough variable output gap? That's a difference between your potential and your actual. And your potential is, of course, it's an unobserved variable. It's difficult to capture, and using econometric methodology, we captured. I have spoken to my students earlier also. Like, you take out the cyclicality component and you call the trend as your potential. So that's the way it is done. But there's a problem over there, and it's a highly controversial topic the moment we talk about the output gap, because you must have read in the works of Geeta Gopinath of IMF, Chief Economist Geeta Gopinath, her paper with Mark. That title of the paper is Cycle is Trend. They take a look into that paper, because these are not temporary aberrations. What's happening as a growth downturn, it's not cyclical. This is going to be a permanent scar unless you work out your structural elements. So the moment fiscal policy and monetary policy act as a counter-cyclical policy tool, then you are dealing only with the cyclicality elements. And you think that the moment you correct your cyclicality, then you're going to get the growth prior to the pre-pandemic levels. But that will not happen, because of structural, the productivity, the structural issues are very important to deal with this crisis. And I stop here and look forward to your questions and comments. And over to you, Professor Ramankutty. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Lekha, for that very deep presentation on. I will be very frank, and macroeconomics has always been my weak spot. So you asked me what did I learn from this. I don't know if I've correctly understood the message, but I think what you have tried to say is that governments should not be fixated on inflation control at this point of time, because expenditure contraction can lead to hardships for the people. So, which means in turn that we may have to accept some level of inflation. And there are other means at the government's disposal, but all of them have a cost, and you have to look at what are the trade-offs between the various options before the government. So with that very, very crude understanding of this, what you said, I will pass on to the audience. But just one question. I mean, this is very, very naive question, but the stock market seems to be in good shape. What is your take on that?
Oh, thank you. I was about to tell that because it's all about the financial exuberance, but there is a disconnect between the real sector and the financial sector. So this financial exuberance, we are so happy about it. And even if you look at the GDP numbers meticulously, the narrative that the growth process is investment led, that narrative is no longer there. It's all consumption led. That can be a transitory thing if it is consumption led. And when salaries are plummeting, when there is job loss, where is the growth recovery came from? It may be profits led. So you are absolutely correct in saying that, whatever recovery we got, that's profit led. And that's why, I also mentioned about widening inequalities. So with the paradigm is we are focusing just on economic growth process, but it is beyond growth. We need to look into the inequalities also to tackle this. And you're correct when you said that there's a disconnect between what is happening in the financial sector and the real sector. Yes, thank you for that question.
Okay, so now it's open for comments and questions, please. You can even put in the chat or raise your hand. I don't know if it's possible to raise a hand. At least you can unmute yourself and ask the question. I'm sure there are a lot of economics people in this crowd. I was expecting a lot of questions.
Shalini, can you unmute if anybody is raising a question?
Yeah, sure, sir. ആർക്കെങ്കിലും questions ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ unmute ചെയ്ത് സംസാരിക്കാവുന്നതാണ് കേട്ടോ. ഞാൻ ഒന്നുകൂടെ repeat ചെയ്യാം. If you have any doubts, you can unmute yourself and ask.
Okay, I am Philip Sabu.
Yeah.
Audible? Am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you, Philip.
Okay. Madam, it was a beautiful presentation on the situation the country is facing and the world is facing, and I congratulate you for the excellent presentation. And my question is about the monetization of the assets. How far it will improve the resource position of central and state governments in facing the pandemic-induced growth problem?
Okay. That's what, Philip, I mentioned in my lecture also. It's all about, we are talking about just 5 to 6% of the entire revenue and the capital receipts budget, nothing more than that. Even if we are successful in getting this asset monetization or disinvestment or private proceeds or anything, we are talking only about the 6% of the entire revenue receipts. So the other crucial elements are tax and non-tax. And in the pandemic times, it is not possible to increase the tax rate to get the revenue collected, because that will further affect the disposable income in the hands of people. So COVID tax, that was not there, that's welcome. But at the same time, you have not talked anything about the business taxation, how you can maneuver the business taxation to get the income correct, and also to talk about, the wealth tax or the top 1% people, how you can, get money from there. So these kind of policy tools on the revenue side, that's not it. We have not spoken about it, but these are quite relevant, in the process of revenue generation, not alone the asset monetization. And the way the privatization that happened, if we look at the aviation sector, the way it has happened also, you need to unpack, and we won't be appreciating the sense like the kind of government owning that particular airlines in that time. And over the years, the way that airlines have grown, it's all using the taxpayers' money. And right now, why they have gone into the crisis, if you look at the details, that may be a quite one particular point of huge interest payments, or their bad decision of going for buying more Boeing. So maybe those kind of very specific issues that led to this problem in the aviation sector. Now the valuation process is done by the government, and it is above 50,000 crores or something like that. But the way the Tata bought it was not matching at all for that. But you need to see how the valuation is done, how the bidding is done, how the auction process is done. So are we getting any benefits out of this? So these are operational questions. So I have my own doubts about this privatization or asset monetization. So we need to see sector by sector. And another example coming to my mind is the mining sector. They say that the way Hindustan Zinc Limited, in the context of the non-atomic, non-ferrous minerals, they have done well. But we need to see that case study, how it has happened. So, my take is mixed in this. Your particular question was how we are going to improve our revenue. Revenue, of course, it is very fixed at 6%, even if we get our aspirations correct. But to me, it's a broader picture. Like it's not the question of fiscal proceeds, but it's a broader picture, how you do the valuation, how you do the pricing, and the other macroeconomic context which we need to see. That's my take on this. I'm not completely for asset monetization at all. Thank you.
Hello. No more questions?
Ma'am, I'm Chaco. Yeah. I have a question that if you look at situations like this, that is situations like a crisis in the past, especially if you look at the Great Depression of 1930s or the world wars or similar pandemics in the past, the recovery path was led by government, huge government fundings. But now we see a sort of macroeconomic instability or unpredictability, where the government is withdrawing from funding, or if at all it is funding by selling off the public sector assets. So how do you think this will impact the recovery path of the present crisis?
Yeah, thank you. There was a policy transition, Chaco, as you mentioned. In the Great Depression time, the importance was given to the fiscal policy authorities. But if you look at the 2007 crisis, after the global financial crisis, the emphasis was given to the monetary policy tools. But in the pandemic period, we understood the limitations of the monetary policy, because the narrative was the heavy lifting, whatever it takes was a narrative, but it has been partial in terms of triggering the economic recovery. So let's unpack these cases quickly. And after the world wars, there was even consoles, the kind of bonds, the war bonds was floated as a part of financing this huge deficit at that point of time. But we don't have any COVID bonds or anything designed right now. That is one thing. Second is, if you look at the global financial crisis, the emphasis on the monetary policy, that didn't work well, in the sense the rate of interest became zero bound. When your rate of interest goes zero bound, how can it trigger the economy? It's a kind of a liquidity, the trap. Yeah. And the rate of interest is even going negative. Yeah, Anju, Ali, I can, okay. Even it's going negative. So when the rate of interest is zero bound and it will go negative, then there are limitations for the monetary policy to trigger the economic growth process. So having seen these two cases, as you rightly pointed out, there's an importance, for the fiscal policy to act as the first mover to tackle this pandemic economics. But that is not happening because of the policy transition from discretion to rules-based economics. Rules-based in the sense, monetary policy stance, that is rules-based based on inflation targeting, and fiscal policy is rules-based based on the Fiscal Responsibility and the Management Bill or Management Act, or whatever threshold ratios of the fiscal deficit to GDP we need to maintain, and the kind of golden rule principle which we need to maintain. Golden rule in the sense that whatever we earn through our revenue, use it for your spending, so that the borrowing will go entirely for your capital infrastructure. So that's a golden rule. There are a lot of constraints in the fiscal policy framework. So given that constraints, instead of going for a huge decision that of course, we increase our fiscal space, I think we are, in a sense, erring on the side of caution that revenue stability decides expenditure priorities. If our revenues are not stable, we will go for expenditure compression. That could be quite detrimental, and that is a concern.
Thank you. I'd like to add one more question that many of the relief packages presented by the central government depended more on making loans available rather than funding. So do you think that sort of packages will pull the economy out of the recovery, the recession?
Oh, Chaco, you nailed it. I don't believe that at all. That's why, I mentioned in my lecture also the two scenarios. One is the credit deployment as a determinant of economic recovery, and second, the faith in your fiscal fiat to get your economic recovery all right. But we are experimenting with the credit deployment, and the recent RBI statistics, if you look into, the picture is not good. The credit deployment statistics, if you look into infrastructure sectors, other service sectors, if you look into there is no credit growth rate that's happening. So this is also leading to a kind of bad bank or a bad assets in the future, the NPAs in the future, the mounting. This is what, as Stiglitz has pointed out, like if you depend on the credit deployment or the loans as the base of this, that could lead to, to more problems. Now you're facing the twin balance sheet crisis, right? We have to cleanse our banking sector balance sheet and also the corporate debt. But these things are going to mount the moment we depend on the credit offtake as a determinant of the credit culture as a determinant of the economic recovery process. So that philosophically, or that narrative is like that. And I have enjoyed reading about this in the book Between Devil and Debt that is written by the Turner. In that book, it became quite evident that what are the negative consequences if you depend on the credit narrative to get the growth recovery process. You may not get it all right. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam,
yes,
would you entertain one more question from me? I'm Professor Philip Sabu.
Definitely, if Professor Raman
okay.
So, yeah.
It's a continuation of the question issue raised by Dr. Ramankuti. Okay. See, if you look at the performance of the corporate sector, you can notice a very distinct phenomenon that the business has flown to the organized corporate sector from the unorganized and the MSME sector. If you look at the revenue side and the profit side of the corporates, you can see that there is increase in the performance, financial performance. So, in fact, the pandemic has helped the corporate sector, and it has badly affected the MSME sector. So, how can we resolve this problem? Because MSME sector is the largest employer in the country, and it will any bad thing happening to the MSME sector will be increasing the income inequality. And see, we have fallen down in the hunger index also. So it's a major problem.
Of course.
How to address?
Of course, two things. One is you talked about the corporate sector and how uneven the growth process have been within that sector. Within the private corporate sector, that concern is crucial. Even when we thought about reducing the corporate rates, we went ahead with reducing the effective tax rate of the units up to a certain threshold, because effectively the small and the medium term and the low firms, they were having the effective tax rate higher than the high industrial giants. So that was a concern, and this concern is real. Second, we need to study about this process, and recently there was a conference by NIPFP and International Institute of Public Finance. In that, there was a paper presented by Tarun Jain of Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. I gathered with Munich from RBI. So they used, the kind of data, the economic growth process captured by the intensity of the night lights. That's the way they were trying to capture the impact of the pandemic on, the growth process in the informal sector. So we don't have quite a good data to understand about the informal sector, and we depend on the nightlight luminosity to study this process. So there are concerns, because we are empirical economists, and unless we have the data, then we will not be even about to capture the the magnitude of the crisis that is happening in the informal sector. So that's why the pandemic package, the whole in the pandemic package is what is the policy component they have designed to support the transfers to the small, medium industries and the cash in the hands of the affected people. So when you look into that, that is not there. Simply, when you design the pandemic package, of course, 4 components are important. One is growth recovery. The sectors need to be given support. Second is, how you are supporting the small firms and the livelihood crisis. So this component, that was not given adequate emphasis by any pandemic packages. A series of, packages were announced, but these concerns were not, addressed properly. Maybe we can wait and see what's happening. It's going to happen in future, but these concerns were not addressed at all. That's a limited point I would like to highlight. And monetary policy cannot do complete, correction, policy course correction, because I talked about the limitations. It has to be primarily fiscal, and we need to wait and see what are the fiscal measures to be taken to tackle this process. Because supply side economics, that was the basis of the pandemic policy design. But supply side means you support the firm, but unless the economic activity is generated and unless there's a market for your products, the demand side is not stimulated, then that process is not yet complete. So when the demand is still, dull, then supply side will not be able to create wonders. So we have to wait and see what is the demand stimulation process that's going to be, given emphasis in future. So far, I haven't seen anything in any elements in the component package.
Okay, are there other questions? I think there are no more questions. So, is there a formal vote of thanks, Professor Sudharan?
Chandrababu will give a formal vote of thanks. Chandrababu?
I invite.
Yes. Yes. I respected Dr. Ramanguti, chairperson of this session, Dr. Lekha Chakraborty, Dr. Menes, Shaijan, and other friends. This is a very enlightening talk delivered by Dr. Lekha Chakraborty on macroeconomic response to COVID-19. Immediately after COVID-19 broke out, we heard a lot about Atmanirbhar. And what is Atmanirbhar outcome? Selling spree of every public assets. And in the lecture, Dr. Lekha correctly pointed that not more than 5% of the GDP will be coming from this. I'm wondering, after what all the assets were sold out, then what will India do? I'm wondering. I'm not an economist or I am not a practitioner in economics, but these are the simple doubts even after the government is going on the selling spree of the public assets. Anyway, this lecture was very enlightening, and the response was so good that so many questions also have been raised by the participants, and very intelligent questions are taken. The discussions are overall good. I'm not going to elaborate upon it, and I thank Dr. Lekha Chakraborty for delivering this good lecture. I thank you, ma'am, for participating and making our program a success. Then I thank Dr. Veeramangude, chairperson of this meeting, and all of the participants who contributed with their questions. I thank you all once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thank you very much, Dr. Lekha, and thank you very much, Mrs. Padma Subramanian, and all the rest of the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So
thank you all. Thank you. And we can close the session.
Yes, the session is closed. The meeting is over.
Thank you. Okay, I'm leaving. I'll call you later, Sudhakaran Mas.
Yeah,
Thank you so
definitely.
much for the opportunity.
Yeah,
thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. I shall call you.